Hi, my name is Dana and I'm an instructor here at the Green Bay Driver Training Center here with Schneider. And I'm going to show you how I do my CDL pre-trip inspection. And we're going to start by turning the lights on in the truck. Okay, so we're going to begin by turning all of the lights on. So if you're in an older piece of equipment, you would put the four ways on and put the headlights on. That switches to the left of the steering column here. Or if you have a newer model piece of equipment, like the P4, like this one, you would turn on your light test switch right here. Now I'm going to grab my tools and start under the hood. So I'm going to begin by getting my tools. So you'd like a rag to check your oil, and a hammer, and some gloves. Then we're going to open the hood. I'm going to open from the side so I don't injure my back. Okay, so I'm going to put my gloves on and start in the engine compartment. Okay, so one of the first things that I do when I'm looking at the engine, I do an overall look at the engine, look for any cracks, look for any puddles underneath the engine compartment. I'm also going to check any hoses and wiring, look for any abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and on the wiring, no exposed or bare wires. Then I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to check my air filter housing for any signs of cracks or damage and no missing clamps. Check my engine air duct work, same thing, no missing clamps or damaged parts. And those will lead to the turbocharger right here. So no exhaust leaks from the turbocharger, all of the bolts are in place. And then move on to the radiator. The radiator mount is secure, it's not loose. All of the fan blades are intact. And no signs of leaking or damage from the radiator. And we're going to check our alternator. Now the alternator is a little tricky to see. It's down here on this particular model. It has wiring going into it. Check it for secureness and check your wiring, and also check your serpentine belts here. They should be tight, no more than 3/4 of an inch of free play at the middle point, and no signs of cracks or damage. We're going to check our air conditioning compressor. It should be secure. It's also belt driven, and check the condition of the hoses coming out of that unit. And we're going to check a fluid on this side of the truck. We're going to check our windshield washer fluid. Make sure the cap is secure and that we can see fluid level in the reservoir right here. And that really concludes all of the engine compartment that I would check on this side of the truck. Now we're going to move on to the suspension. So the suspension, first of all, starts with your frame rail, securely mounted. It has no man-made holes or man-made welds. They're all factory. I'm going to check my leaf springs, and they are right here. So my leaf springs are here. They're held in place with the U-bolts and also held in place with the spring mounts. So all of the bolts are in place. There's one in the front, and there's also one in the back. After I inspect those, make sure they're properly aligned and no signs of damage. I'm going to check my shock absorber. The shock absorber is here. It's securely mounted on the top and the bottom, and it is not leaking, so there's no signs of damage on the shock absorber. There's one steering component that I would check on this side of the truck, and that's going to be my tie rod. And the tie rod is this round bar that comes behind the axle, and it's connected with the castle nut and cotter key. They're behind the axle. And that concludes our suspension. The next part will be the brake components that I check. So I'm going to inspect the brake air lines here. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. This is my ABS wire, and they lead, the hose leads to the brake chamber. It's securely mounted, it's not dented or damaged, and it has the clamp in place. And then we have this push rod coming out of your brake chamber, and that's connected to the slack adjuster, and that's held in place with this pin and cotter key. Inside the tire should be able to see your brake linings, The brake linings must be free of damage with no contaminants. If there were contaminants like oil, that might mean there's an inner wheel seal leak. Your brake lining should be a minimum of 1/4 of an inch thick. They should be touching the brake drum, and the brake drum should be perfectly round with no illegal welds on it. Right? And that takes us to the tire then. So I'm going to inspect my tire for any abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and I'm going to inspect my tread depth and make sure that it has 4/32 evenly worn. I'm also going to check the tire pressure. We should have 120 psi on this particular tire, and I check it by hitting the tire with a hammer, and if it bounces back or has recoil, that's an indication that it has adequate inflation, or I could check it using a gauge on my valve stem. Okay, and then I'm going to move on down here and check the condition of my wheel. Look for any cracks between the holes of my wheel. This is an aluminum wheel, so if I had anything cracked, I might see something shiny. Also, if my lug nuts were loose, I might see shiny pattern around the lug nuts, or I could see shiny thread indicating looseness. So I'm going to verify that they're all in place and not loose. I'm going to check this area down here for any signs of leaking, or check my hub seal, and then I would clean off the sight glass and verify that I had proper oil level inside the hub. And make sure you have a metal stem and a valve cap. And that concludes this side, and then we would go over to the driver's side. All right, so now we're on the driver's side, and some of the things that you inspect will be the same as the other side. For example, you would begin by checking the overall condition of the engine itself, no leaking underneath, hoses, wires, same as we did before. You would check your air filter housing on this side, make sure that the reservoir, or I'm sorry, not the reservoir, the housing is not cracked or damaged. Check your engine air duct work on this side, and also check your radiator and your belts on this side. So you see some things are repetitive. We are going to check some fluid levels on this side. The first fluid level that I check is going to be my coolant level. Make sure it's between the cold minimum and cold maximum, and that the caps are tight and the reservoir is not cracked. I'm also going to check my power steering fluid here. If you can see through the reservoir, you can check it. Otherwise, if you have difficulty seeing through it, you could always take the cap off and check for the proper level. The next thing I'm going to check is going to be my oil. So when I pull out the dipstick for the oil, I'm first going to inspect the condition of the oil. Look for any metal shavings inside or white milky color indicating there's some contaminants inside. I'm going to wipe off the dipstick. And we'd like to have the oil between the minimum and maximum line. And there we go, we have the proper level. If I were below the minimum, I would add 1 gallon of oil right here in the oil fill cap. So make sure that's tight if you're not using it. Now some of the other engine components that we don't have on the other side, that's going to be your water pump right here, securely mounted. This one is belt driven on this model, but check any hoses and clamps and verify nothing is leaking. We're also going to check our fuel components. We have our fuel filter inside here. At the bottom part is the fuel water separator, and we're going to drain that as recommended by the manufacturer. I drain it every time I get fuel by turning this valve here, and that's going to remove any sediment or water that's in your system. These brown hoses right here are fuel lines, and they are going to lead us to this thing, and that is your fuel pump. Okay, now one thing that's really tricky to see on this side of the engine is your air compressor. The air compressor is located down here at the base of these hoses, so very difficult to see, but that's going to be your air compressor on this model. And some other things we check on this side that are not on the other side will be your steering components. So we have our steering arm here, no more than 10 degrees of play, and then we have our joints here and here. They're not loose or shiny, indicating a problem. Then we have our steering gearbox, and then our our other steering components like our pitman arm, our drag link, and then ultimately to the tie rod, which looks the same on both sides. So I'm going to check some of the same components that I checked on the other side. For example, the frame, springs, spring mounts, U-bolts, and shock absorbers. So again, I'm inspecting them the same on this side. Also, I'm going to inspect my brake components like my brake air line, my brake chamber, the push rod, and the slack adjuster the same way that I did on the other side. Inside the tire, I would check my brake drum and my brake linings, minimum of 1/4 of an inch thickness again, no contaminants on the brake pads. Make sure they're touching the drum and there's no damage, and check all of my tire components again. So proper tread depth is 4/32. Proper tire pressure for this type of tire is 120 psi. I'm going to check that with my hammer. Check for any abrasions, bulges, or cuts on the inside and outside. And again, check your tires, your lug nuts, your tires, wheels, and lug nuts, your hub seal here for any signs of leaking, your hub oil level by looking in the sight glass, and verify that your valve stem is straight with the metal valve cap. That concludes the engine compartment. Now I'm going to move on to the side of the truck here. Going to inspect the side of your truck, meaning going to inspect the mirror, make sure the bracket is tight, the glass is clean and not damaged. Open and close the door. Check the weather stripping around the door. Make sure it's not loose or damaged. And that the hinges are tight so the door doesn't have any slop in it, it doesn't move around. I did have the window up and down earlier, so I verified the glass didn't have any damage. I'm going to check my steps. If there's snow on here or grease or oil, I would remove that so I wouldn't have a slip hazard, so I check my steps. The side skirting here is secure. It's not going to come off when I'm driving. And inside this little compartment here is where we're going to see access to our batteries. Check the ground and make sure that there's no battery acid on the ground, they're not cracked or leaking. And then this is where I drain my air tanks, and I would do this during my en route and my post-trip inspection. So every truck is a little bit different. They usually have 3 or 4 drains. This one has 3 drains right here. I'm going to close that and continue moving down the side of the equipment. I'm also going to check the overall condition of the side of my cab, make sure no one scratched it while I was taking my break. Check my sleeper berth glass up there, verify that the glass is closed and it's not cracked. I'm also going to inspect the cap on my DEF system, verify that it's secure, no signs of leaking. And I can look inside here at my fuel tank, check the fuel tank straps and make sure they have a rubber spacer and no signs of fuel leaking on the ground. And then I'm going to take the cap off of my fuel tank. It's like a medicine cap. You push and twist it. We're going to verify we have our safety chain, our rubber gasket, and our spring is functioning properly. Make sure there's no signs of tampering inside my fuel tank. Verify that my equipment has a current IFTA sticker or International Fuel Tax Agreement. Commercial carriers have to have that, so I want to verify that's on there. And any PM sticker or preventative maintenance, or sometimes called annual vehicle inspection sticker. And my DOT annual inspection sticker is located inside the side compartment. So you have to have an annual inspection every year or annually, and this one is due in April. And now I'm going to inspect the rear of the cab. So I'm going to inspect the cab suspension, which is the shock absorber and the airbag, and also my cross member, or that piece, that metal piece that goes from the frame rail from the left to the right there. So I'm looking for any signs of damage, any holes in my airbags, or any leaking from my shock absorbers. I'm also going to inspect my frame rail and my drive shaft from this area. So if you have a truck like this one, you can move inside there, or many people don't even have this little mud flap here, so it's really easy to access. We're also going to inspect our air and electrical lines. So we have our air lines here, Make sure they're not tangled with each other and that they're securely fastened to their connections on the cab and also connected to the fasteners on the trailer. They're not crimped or leaking air, and our electrical line is secure. They're not touching the catwalk, and they're hooked up in the proper fashion or the correct order. And now we're going to talk about the front of the trailer. So I'm going to inspect all of my body panels. On this trailer, they're orange, so I look for any signs of holes or dents indicating shifting freight. I'm also going to check my registration, and on this model, it's inside this little compartment here. So I would open that up and make sure that it never expired, or if it did have an expiration date, that it was not expired. And then check my PM sticker here, or preventative maintenance or annual inspection sticker, and this unit is still valid until June of 2020. Now, I'm going to look at this rib on the trailer for any signs of damage. I'm going to check my top rail and bottom rail. So we're talking about the silver parts here now. Look for any structural damage or cuts that indicate a problem, and also inspect your reflective tape. If it's dirty, you want to clean that off so it's more visible to the motoring public. Check these little bolts that fit into your floor rail or your joists. Okay, this is what keeps your floor in place, so you cannot be missing any more than one in a 4-bolt pattern. That secures your floor into place. And before we move on to the rest of the trailer, I'm going to inspect my my fifth wheel and my drive axles before I go any further. And now we're going to inspect the fifth wheel. So since I'm hooked to a trailer, I want to verify that no one has tampered with my equipment. So I'm going to push the release handle in and make sure it's all the way in the locked position. Then I'm going to check my pivot pin and cotter key are in place and secure, no missing parts. I'm going to check my mounting bolts. They're all secure, no shiny threads indicating looseness. I'm going to check my slide locking pins right here. They're protruding through the rail or in the locked position. And then check my stop blocks here and here. And they are welded securely, no broken welds or damaged parts. And while I'm down here, I'm going to inspect this set of my drive axles for the same components that I inspected on the front axles. So I'm going to check my frame rail, which is here. Check my frame rail. It's not cracked or damaged, no illegal welds or man-made welds. They're all factory. And you can check your spring mounts and springs. And on this unit, I have air ride suspension, so I have an airbag here. So I would inspect that for any cuts or leaking air. And the shock absorber is here. It's a little difficult to see, so you may have to get inside like this to inspect all of your components. Also your brake components, the same way that we did on the front. You're going to check your slack adjuster and also check your brake pads. Verify that they're 1/4 of an inch thick, they're tight against the drum, and there are no contaminants on the inside. Now, we have dual tires here. There's 2 of them. So one other thing we inspect when we have 2 tires next to each other is look between them and make sure there's no road debris and we have adequate spacing. Another thing you can see from in here is your valve stem and valve cap, and you can see the back side of that brake drum right there. Okay. Now on this truck, we have covers over the wheels, or I have covers on the wheels, and they reduce wind resistance, but we still have to inspect everything. Let me see if I can take this off of here. So even though I have a cover on here, I still want to verify that my wheel is intact, it's not cracked or damaged. I also have my lug nuts all secure, no signs of shiny threads or looseness, and my valve stem and metal valve cap. This is not a hub where we can check the oil level, but we can make sure that it's not leaking by looking for any oil residue inside there. And we would do the same thing on this set of tires. There we go. Put the cover back on. Very good. Now we're going to move on to the back of the tractor. There's some things we need to check and make sure that my fifth wheel is still latched by using a flashlight going to shine my flashlight here and make sure the locking bar is all the way across the kingpin. Verify the condition of the kingpin is not damaged. You can also check my lights are working here on the back of the tractor, splash guards, and I can see my rear drive shaft and torque rod from here. And while I'm down here, I'm going to check the condition of my landing gear. Both legs are up. The cross members are in place with no signs of damage or missing bolts, no shiny spots. I can also look inside this windshield and verify there's no debris or people or animals or anything seeking shelter under here. I can also see my floor brackets and make sure nothing's going to come through the floor here. So quick inspection while you're down here. Look at everything you can't see while you're standing outside. And as we inspect the side of the trailer, remember we're checking all of our lights and reflectors. The light is the proper color of amber. It's illuminated or lit, and no condensation inside the lens. And we're going to continue walking down the side of the trailer. And now when we get back here, we're going to verify that the tandem release handle is all the way in and down, and our tandem pins or locking pins are engaged or protruding through the rail. Right here. So this trailer has 4 pins. So I'm going to verify all 4. There's one. Also make sure that these air lines are at least 12 inches off of the ground. I can also see my air tank, part of my brake components here. And I really would inspect all of the trailer the same way that I inspected and the other parts. Okay. So tires, wheels, lug nuts, brake components. We have our spring mount, springs. Some trailers have shock absorbers. This one doesn't. Some trailers have airbags or air ride suspension. This one does not, so I wouldn't inspect it, of course. Between these dual tires, verify that there is no debris or anything between there. I can see my valve stem and valve cap. I don't think I mentioned earlier, but these other tires have to have a minimum of 2 30-seconds of tread depth. That's also on the drive axle. 2 30-seconds. And I'll just continue inspecting all of those items all the way around. Check my wheels, lug nuts, hub seal, valve stem and valve cap. You can thump these with my hammer. If they feel the same, sound the same, that means they have pretty close to the same amount of pressure. Proper pressure on these tires is 100 psi. I'm going to check this splash guard or mud flap, secure, and verify that that locking pin is engaged or in the locked position. Okay. This trailer happens to have the hook on the side, but this hook helps the door stay open when you're delivering loads or holding the door open at the customer. So this one has a hook right here. And as we come around the back of the trailer, remember we continue to check all of our lights. The 4-ways are working. The headlights are on, so these running lights are on. Also at the very top of the trailer, we have our clearance lights. And one more light we check back here is going to be our license plate light. So that's on. We check our license plate. It's clean, legible. And when you're at the rear of the trailer, you can see a lot of the components. So I use this area to inspect things like the brake chambers, the brake air lines. We also can see the air tanks and the slack adjuster and push rods. We can also see our brake drums and brake pads, make sure they're tight against the drum. So this is a great area to stand or to kneel down and see those other components. And some other things we inspect back here are going to be our door latches. They're securely fastened at the top and the bottom in their retaining clips. Okay, we check our weather stripping, or sometimes called the door seal. It's intact all the way around to protect the customer's freight. We're also going to check this door chain. The door chain goes into the hook when we back into the customer's dock, so our door is secured to the side of the trailer. I'm going to check our hinges here on both sides for any missing bolts or damaged parts. And then we'll check our DOT bumper. It should not be bent in or out, and verify that we have complete DOT reflective tape. And that concludes the back of the trailer. And as I come around this side of the equipment, I'm just checking everything on this side the same way that I would check on the other side. So for the sake of time saving on the video, I'm just going to do my quick inspections. All right, and one thing that we would check on this side, and that varies by truck too, but I can see my exhaust really well from this side. So I look for any soot tracks indicating leaking exhaust, and look for any shiny parts indicating there might be a loose bracket there. And also on this side of the equipment, make sure we have reflective triangles or safety gear. And here they are, my reflective triangles. I also have some extra oil and coolant just in case. All right, perfect. All right, checking the same stuff I would check on the other side, both sides. And that brings us back to the front of the truck. So I'm going to close the hood and latch it and talk about a few things inside the cab. I'm going to close it from the front. Clear. Okay, I'm going to latch this side first. I'm going to go latch the other side. I'm going to latch this side. Then I want to do some inspections at the front of the truck. So I want to look at my windshield, verify there are no cracks or damage, that the wiper blades are tight against the glass. I can check my clearance lights, they're all working properly. Also inspect my hood mirrors. They're securely fastened and the glass is not broken. You can see all of our lights here, so our turn signal light, our headlights, both sides, and that our bumper is secure and not touching the ground. And we have our license plates clean and legible. And that's the front of the tractor. There are a couple things that we would inspect inside the driver door. Well, first I'm going to put my tools away. A couple things I'm going to check before I climb inside is going to be my permit book. This is where I'll find my registration and my insurance card along with other necessary permits. I'm also going to inspect my fire extinguisher. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're in the side compartment. Make sure it's fully charged and in the green and the proper rating for this vehicle. And I'm going to inspect my brake pedal and accelerator pedal and verify that they are securely fastened with no contaminants or oil or snow, anything on there to cause slipping. I'm going to climb in and do the inside the cab. Okay, now we're going to inspect some things inside the cab. So I'm going to begin by turning all of my lights off or canceling that light check switch that we talked about earlier. Then I'm going to start the truck and check my gauges. So I'm going to wear my seatbelt. Now I'm going to do a safe start to check my gauges. So make sure my parking brakes are set, transmission's in neutral. I'll put the key on to let the gauges sweep. I'm going to start the truck. Now I want to make sure that I have oil pressure within 30 seconds of starting the engine. Check my fuel level. I can see my RPMs here, right about 600. That's normal for this vehicle. I can see my air pressure here and my temperature gauge. So it appears that everything is working properly. Some other things that I would check inside the cab will be my heater and defroster. So I'll put this on defrost and check and make sure the air is blowing on the windshield, and it is. I'm ready to check my heater. Now this takes a few seconds for the air to switch to the different zone. that's working properly. Okay, after checking the air, I'm going to check my windshield, make sure that it doesn't have any cracks or damage. Make sure my windshield wipers work and the washer fluids works out. The next thing is going to be the horn. Both horns, all is working properly. And the last and final step that I would do before I leave is my in-cab air brake test. And thank you for watching how I do my pre-trip inspection. If you're interested in a driving opportunity for Schneider, you can go to the website, schneiderjobs.com, or you could talk to one of our recruiters by calling 1-800-44-PRIDE.